usually how I like to start these conversations is really about an individual's journey. And luckily enough for me, when I get to talk to people, usually they're working on something pretty big that's really going to take a chunk out of their life. A lot of time and energy will go into it, and it's really good and fascinating to see how people to get to that point. So maybe take us through a career path before GoChain became a thing, and talk about maybe your history and how you first introduced to blockchain.
Grant, yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to be on your podcast. It's exciting. Yeah, I guess in terms of my background, I've got a little over 20 years of professional experience. I started out in the management consulting side. At the time, it was Price Waterhouse, so that was pre-merger, so it's way
Mhm.
back. Was doing a lot of just management consulting for Fortune 500 companies, and this is in a variety of different sectors. From there, on the enterprise side, that basically then led me into the corporate finance world, where I was basically doing sell side M&A corporate finance type transactions. So, a lot of my background has really been on the finance and advisory part of it. And then from there, moved into merchant banking and then spent about 10 years or so doing venture capital. And
Mhm.
what I really like about that, and really just some of my history, is that a lot of this time is you're spent on focusing, trying to tackle problems. Try to tackle some big problems. And early in the career, I think these were for large enterprises. And then as we started moving towards the venture capital world, it's great to be able to work with entrepreneurs with
Yep.
big ideas. They want to tackle big problems. And some of the technologies that we were looking at investing in was on the fintech side.
Mhm.
And at the time, as blockchain really started to take off, and obviously the first that everyone was hearing about it was Bitcoin,
Mhm.
and that was back in 2009, 2008, 2009. But yeah, as that started to really ramp up, and I started to learn more about blockchain, I really got very excited about it and really just kind of dove all in. And so I left kind of the VC world and worked on a few projects, and most recently, I was running a blockchain genomics company. And one of the great things is blockchain's just so many different applications now. And I'm sure
Right.
we'll talk about that. But then the opportunity came to move away from the application side to be able to work on the protocol side, and that's
Mhm.
specifically with GoChain, where I'm at now. So that was great. And so basically came over and now CEO running the GoChain Foundation, and really trying to focus on driving adoption of blockchain technology, specifically with the GoChain protocol. And for us, it's really beyond just the adoption and tackling the blockchain scaling problem. It's also having that kind of positive impact, and we really that's really a very much a part of our ethos. And so we're looking to see where we can leverage technology to make an impact for society and our environment.
Yeah, it's been a really crazy journey for blockchain. It's still so young, right? And I think everybody was introduced, whether negative or positive, or introduced to it through Bitcoin, right?
Yep.
And I think people were maybe a little confused that blockchain is crypto, right? And that's sort of not the case, right?
Right.
Blockchain kind of serves all these different purposes, which now we see sort of the NFT craze sort of
Yeah.
come out of blockchain. It's sort of the next iteration of what blockchain can do. But I mean, there's so many different things that can be built right on top of the blockchain. So let's kind of go into a little bit of that and how blockchain can be used for, like you said, ways that we can impact the world, whether it's climate, whether it's looking at building out ethical supply chains through a certain protocol, through blockchain. Like, what are some practical ways that blockchain can positively impact the world in ways maybe
Yeah.
we haven't thought of quite yet?
Yeah, and first, before I answer that, Grant, I just wanted to really underscore something you said, is that there always has been this reflex to just think of Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies as blockchain, and you're so right that it's quite two different things. In that blockchain is the underlying
Mhm.
technology, and in recent years, I think we've really started to see that blossom in the sense that organizations, corporations are now starting to not only they kind of move beyond curiosity of what blockchain might be. Now it's very strategic, right? It's being
Mhm.
implemented across all industries. And one of the best areas, I think, is in the supply chain area,
Mhm.
because when when you have a circumstance where there's a question of transparency, accountability, there's difficulty in auditing or auditability, and where you may also have various intermediaries. These are sort of all the right elements for where a technology like blockchain technology can come in to create transparency, to disintermediate, to sort of get rid of some unnecessary middlemen, and to remove some of those inefficiencies that are sort of plaguing legacy centralized systems. And so supply chain is great because at the end of the day, you're able through a digital element to have really granular chain of custody from the origin all the way to the end consumer. And that's so important to bring that transparency across so many different industries right now. It really touches every industry across the world.
I really like to think in kind of like examples, right? Because it
Yep.
gives sort of a real world type of view on what it can do. And I noticed that GoChain works with Conservation International,
Yes.
correct? On so
Yes.
how does a big nonprofit like that implement blockchain, and like for what reason, right? What is their use case for it?
Sure. And by the way, it's not just Conservation International. We work with quite a few other nonprofits and NGOs. And
Yep.
a lot of what you're pointing out there has to do with ethical supply chains, is one
Hmm.
example.
Hmm.
So if you think about, for example, child labor or
Hmm.
illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, right?
Hmm.
So fishing
Hmm.
stock around the world is truly, it's either exploited or significantly depleted. So trying to find ways for sustainability and conservation through very complex supply chains, this is where blockchain technology can shine. So this could be about coffee.
Hmm.
This could be about palm oil, all sorts of commodities and proteins, agricultural products. These are really areas where blockchain can start to provide some transparency. And if you think about from a consumer standpoint, we hear things like organic, or we hear
Yep. Fair
fair trade.
trade. Yep. Yep.
Exactly. And I always like to kind of put this all into a bucket where you say, okay, you've got a lot of claims, but they're not verified, right? These are unverified claims. And how do we go about getting some transparency there? And that's at the consumer level. But now
Right.
organizations, now they really start to care too, because, I think there's been a real paradigm shift in terms of what's critical at the bottom line. And it's beyond just sort of profitability. We're looking at areas where we can also have an impact on the environment, impact for society. And consumers care, right? And not only consumers, your next hire will really care about the kind of impact you're having in this world. So it all matters at this point, and I think technology can really, really help. So when you're talking about Conservation International, organizations like that, they have very much care about biodiversity, about
Hmm.
conservation, about ethical supply chains, and it's not just food products, by the way. And think about the textile business, fashion,
100%. I was about to
right?
say it's one of the main ones that I always go to and say if we can get that transparency sort of really honed in on. I mean, that's sort of the game changer that I'm thinking of.
Absolutely. So you've got child labor, right? Which is something that we want. Obviously, every corporation, every society wants to avoid forced child labor. And then from a sustainability standpoint, we're moving away from fast fashion to
Yep.
slow fashion, right?
Yep.
And more of a circular economy orientation. And to do that, you need technology. You need technology, not just blockchain, by the way. You need
Yep.
sort of a mosaic approach of different solutions. But I think that's what's so exciting right now, is when I kind of put my VC cap back on, is that it's a great time, for
Yeah.
entrepreneurs to be able to tackle these big problems through the use of technologies. Business models are more, accommodating now, and technological barriers are a lot lower. So it's a great time to be an entrepreneur, to try to not only make money and grow a business, but to be able to tackle some of the greatest challenges we have out there.
If you're talking to sort of founders that want to, or founders coming into to starting companies, right? They're thinking about doing something, whether it's in the climate space or the blockchain space or the educational space or agriculture. I think is another big one that blockchain can sort of
Hmm.
obviously come in and make some real changes to. When you put your VC hat back on for a second, what would you recommend them sort of do, right? What are some of the spaces that you think maybe blockchain has sort of still in that first inning that it could attack these problems. And we talked about fast fashion, which is, I mean, huge. Obviously, that is a massive, massive industry, and also food. Is there another one maybe that we haven't touched on that blockchain can really disrupt that maybe we haven't thought about quite yet?
Yeah, I think it's happening on so many areas right now
Yeah,
because I mean, even blockchain itself is early, right? And
sure. Yeah,
so,
yeah,
I mean, that is, even
totally.
of
Good
itself
point.
is so early, and I think there's a lot of players coming into just even look at distributed ledger technologies and blockchain technologies. But it's still early, right? And I think we're all still trying to figure out ways to tackle scalability. I mean, if you're still engaged in blockchain-based transactions and you have significant transaction times and high transaction fees, and you're talking about NFTs that potentially the minting process could
Hmm.
be, having a very significant carbon footprint, which is a big challenge right now.
Yep.
There's a lot of friction points that still need to be solved, right? And so I think a lot of this right now is education, but I would also point out that where you see there's societal tailwinds, but there's also very significant regulatory considerations. And
Huge. Yep.
so there's, from a business standpoint, there's going to be some major requirements that are not only now, but that are coming in the very near term, where all businesses are going to have to think about how to be in compliance, right? And so whether that's oil and gas, whether that is in the food traceability, which is very
Yep.
very big right now, and this is really for any business, right? If you're going to be shipping food products overseas into the U.S. or just even within the U.S., you're going to have a fast response time, electronic records to be able to be responsible for traceability, and if there's a foodborne illness or outbreak, right? And so
Mm.
lots of regulatory areas where I think are going to be favorable for blockchain based businesses to be able to solve some problems, right? And yeah, I mean, supply chain I think is a big one. Regulatory, obviously there's a lot of people tackling the fintech space and
Yeah.
DeFi, and then now obviously NFT and art, and it's almost all happening all at once. And an
Yeah.
area that we've been focusing on too is when you look at sustainability, conservation, research. We work with universities as well, and there's lots of novel areas where you can start to look at blockchain-based
Yeah.
research and
Scientific
application.
data and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Huge. Yeah.
Anytime where there's data, and again, that's a big part of it, right? Is how to share
Yep.
data,
Yep.
and then once you have that data, what's on chain, what's off chain, how do you audit that and share that on a real time basis? These are all, like I said, there's almost so much happening across the board, but it's exciting. I think it's so many different areas where entrepreneurs have an opportunity to make an impact.
The one thing that I don't know why I'm optimistic, but about this part of it, but I just feel like if we got people in the right positions within this sector that I'm about to talk about, I think blockchain has a great opportunity to actually make governments work really well
Yep.
and really efficiently. And I want to touch on that a little bit because I do think it's important for societies as we sort of see now in the last 2 years, the sort of mismanagement of COVID, right?
Mm.
I don't know if any government's really gotten it right, but like how can governments use blockchain to be more efficient?
Yeah, there's so many different areas, and the good thing is there are some governments that have begun to embrace this digital transformation, but to your point, sadly, a lot of governments have not, and they're still really mired in legacy systems, very much paper based filing and systems. But the real issue is to move towards this digitization process, right? And if you think at the most basic level, if we had digital identities
Hmm.
that everyone had for example, had a basic wallet that was in harmony with government systems, you could have so many of our day-to-day transactions, our day-to-day events, encounters that are from tax to getting a speeding ticket to
Yeah.
going to the DMV. All this can be a much more seamless process. And if you have blockchain, now you have a much more efficient way to share data, a single source of truth, and to be able to have full transparency on that data, right? But it's a
Yeah.
long road, unfortunately, to get there. I would say some of the more progressive, innovative governments, they're usually a bit smaller, right? So they can be much more nimble in how to approach their society. But it's going to take some time. But you're seeing it, right? There's some big big countries, governments out there that are moving towards whether that be central bank digital currencies or looking to do more digitization. There are steps. It's happening. It's happening, but it's a slow process, unfortunately.
I think land rights was something that I was reading that some governments are kind of using blockchain to kind of understand and identify ownership of land, right? Sort
Yep.
of a simple thing, but a really major thing to the person and to that area. Do you have other examples maybe of governments
Yeah.
doing small things that can be implemented by at scale, right? By sort of every country.
Yeah, so that's a good one, by the way, and it goes back to your earlier question about what can entrepreneurs do. That's just a simple example of just
Right.
something
Yeah.
so basic,
Yeah.
right? Like real estate, land titles. These kind of things are really good. There's a lot of innovation happening now around healthcare as well.
Hmm.
There's certainly in terms of supply chain, but also even talking about research and clinical trials and
Yeah.
consent. These kind of things provide opportunities. And also when everyone's talking telemedicine now, and you can certainly incorporate blockchain technologies and other technologies to that process as well. So yeah, I mean, I think governments are certainly looking to see. It starts, I think, with finance, but they're looking to see a lot of areas where they can start to digitize. And some of this comes into the form of exchanges as well, where they're looking to see. Because think about really any commodity, right?
Yeah.
Commodities becomes an area where there's lots of intermediaries for trade. So this becomes areas where they can start to experiment in terms of cross-border trade finance, and then tokenization of assets. This is really where it's starting, but I think it's anecdotally really around just a few really progressive governments that are starting to do it. But I think even in the States, we've seen legislation coming out with a few very forward leaning states that are willing to accept taxes in
Yeah.
cryptocurrencies,
Yeah.
which is a positive sign. And then you've got certain, I guess you can say, innovation zones that are
Yeah.
centered around distributed ledger technologies. So, I think a lot of this is because a lot of governments are seeing that innovation can create new jobs, right? And create
Totally.
new opportunities for their people, and so I think this is people are starting to come around to that idea, and certainly you see lots of universities now picking up blockchain based programs, degrees,
Totally.
and exploring what's the cross section between blockchain and agriculture and
Hmm.
other areas, right? So it's happening. It's happening. It's just I think a lot of us want to see it happen faster. That's all.
My mind always thinks in parallels, and my parallel would be like dial-up internet, right? That's like maybe, would you say maybe even before dial-up internet, like that's the phase we are in now, how early blockchain is, like in comparison to to like the internet, right? Growth. Like, is that how early we still are? Or is it even earlier than that?
No, it's early like that, but I think it's starting to move quickly now. A lot of conversations that I have now, most boards and C levels, they're well aware of the technology now. They're just looking to see how to adopt it, right?
Yep.
And so I think it's happening. And you see a lot of the bigger players, they're definitely already moving beyond kind of experimentation and piloting. They're rolling it out. Initially, it's always like sort of a sandbox environment, but yeah, I mean, just for our conversations, I've seen a huge uptick. Really in the past 18 months, that this is really becoming a key part of businesses' strategies. I think that's just going to continue to accelerate.
So here's my pitch on politicians should run. Once we have like a wallet, like for citizens can have like some type of wallet they can use, and it can track like if you spend money locally, you get tax breaks.
Mm,
That I think that's a really cool way to get people like to buy locally more.
yep.
Is to reward them.
There's so many ways. I feel like if you digitize the process, like you brought up a good example, rewards-based systems, right? That you can really authenticate you did something, and from there you can automate yourself with some rewards, right? And I think the question boils down though is this question of transparency. How much, and I don't want to answer this, but how much do you want the government to see, and how much should the
Sure.
government see? These are like I think some questions that people grapple with, but I think there are ways to make that a much more seamless process, and like you said, you get more societal engagement, and you get efficiencies there too, right? If you certain call to action, you can get some positive response and some incentives to perform, and you can digitize that entire process.
Yeah, I mean, it would totally be voluntary for sure. For sure.
Right.
It'd have to be
Right.
voluntary. But I think most people would adopt certain things, right, that are
Yep.
useful and actually work, right? That's the thing
Yep.
is we're so used to governments not working that we don't want to give them anything, let alone our tax dollars, right?
Right.
But if we show like efficiency and things like work really well, I think people are willing to adopt certain things. I wanted to chat about the GoChain Foundation and
Yes.
exactly sort of what that is in comparison to right the company itself.
Yep.
What are the
Yep.
sort of differences and maybe what is the mission and the vision of the foundation? What is that sort of attacking?
Yeah, so the GoChain Foundation was founded in 2018 and really was to tackle the blockchain scaling problem. And
Hmm.
we kind of touched on this earlier, but blockchain, wonderful innovation, tremendous promise, but it still continues to have challenges in terms of scalability. The very significant carbon footprint, right? And
Hmm.
so with that kind of inefficiency and lack of scalability, it also hinders adoption. And so the GoChain Foundation was founded to do that, really to tackle the scaling problem in order to drive real world enterprise government adoption of blockchain technologies. And as part of that mission, a very important part of the GoChain Foundation and the GoChain protocol specifically is that the GoChain has a different, what we call sort of consensus mechanism. And what that really means is that when you look at a blockchain protocol, each protocol may tackle it differently in terms of how does the network reach consensus to add that next block on the blockchain,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Now, depending on what you do, and without getting sort of into the weeds, it has implications on, for example, the kind of computational requirements and energy consumption needed to add
Yeah.
that next block on the blockchain. And unlike other protocols out there, which they approach differently and not necessarily right or wrong, because it depends on, in some regards, its use case and the level of security, I guess, that and scalability that you're looking for. But we don't rely on, say, anonymous miners and these heavy computational proof of work type constructs.
Hmm.
We
Right.
we look at it from something we call proof of reputation, and what that means is that we're working with a maximum of 50 organizations from around the world. Now, these are highly reputable legal organizations, and these organizations, they believe in blockchain, they believe specifically in our mission, and they're essentially staking their reputation to serve as the governance framework for the GoChain blockchain, and they're responsible for reaching consensus and adding that next block to the GoChain blockchain. And that's how it works. And as a result of how we've set this up, we have tremendous benefits in terms of scalability,
Hmm.
especially relative to some of the major protocols out there. To give you an example, for Ethereum, they're averaging, let's say 13 transactions per second. You have 100x scalability on top of that. Again, it's because of how we've set up consensus. And if you're a government or you're an enterprise, you might
Right.
really care about who has access to your data or who's processing your data. You're managing your blockchain. So that's how we view the way forward to drive adoption. And I think it's really punctuated right now because when you look at NFTs and the craze of NFTs right now, now the question is coming about in terms of all this computational requirements for sustainability. And so
Yep.
that's really where we start to shine, I think, on two fronts. One is that we are a very sustainable protocol, so you can basically mint sustainable NFTs. And the consortium that we're working with our consensus, for example, Conservation International, you've got Penn State University, Lenovo, the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Bee, FinZaTax. I mean, these are all
Wow.
highly reputable organizations, universities, NGOs, not Fortune 500 companies. That becomes the real trust foundation for the GoChain protocol. So in addition to the protocol itself, the foundation then is also essentially very important, is that they are responsible for onboarding these right node signers or validators for the network. And so we go through a long, lengthy process to identify these right organizations to be part of the GoChain governance framework. And at the same time, as certain organizations, whether we get some newer organizations that maybe have a higher reputational matrix, so to speak, certain organizations we may kind of phase out. But the idea is to keep building that reputation standard and to basically continue to instill high level of trust into the GoChain protocol. And so that's really, to answer your question, the foundation itself it's really about building out, advancing the protocol, making sure that it's proof of reputation, consensus mechanism, having the right node partners, validators, and then really continuing to just to grow the ecosystem, grow utility for our token, which is the Go token,
Yep.
and yeah, these are really I would say the key responsibilities and to drive usage of the GoChain protocol.
You touched on a couple of things because sustainability, energy. Again, I'm gonna. I try to think of these things to understand them in comparison to other things. Can you
Hmm.
maybe explain the energy sort of consumption that it takes, right? Because we sort of look at PayPal, right?
Right.
PayPal somebody, right? It's sort of simple. It's kind of easy. It kind of happens now pretty immediately. There's some certain distinguishing circumstances, but for overall, it's gotten better, right? Since a decade ago, PayPal was worse than it is today. When we say we're going to buy something with Bitcoin, right, or buy something with Ethereum, there is much more that goes into it, right? There are these gas fees, right, because there are these mining fees. There's all this sort of thing that go into actually adding that new chain, right, that new block, or successfully monitoring that payment, making that payment successful. So, like, I guess give us a glimpse on like what actually takes up so much energy, because it is an issue, right? It is an issue that people talk about and people write about is the energy consumption and uses that blockchain or crypto, however you want to call it, the entire ecosystem does take up a lot of energy. So I
Yeah.
guess why is that?
Yeah, so depending on the protocol, there's potentially a high requirement for computational power to solve basically complex problems, right? These are complex mathematical problems, and if you're a miner for certain protocols, in order to get rewarded, you need to be able to solve these complex problems, and whoever is able to solve these problems, they're basically given the opportunity to be rewarded for minting the next block on the blockchain.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
that's by design, and it adds a high level of security to certain protocols. And but the consequence of that is you require a tremendous amount of computers and computational power to try to be the first to solve these complex problems. And so you see a lot of these miners will go towards area where they can have beneficial energy costs, right? But at the end
Hmm.
of the day, these are still tremendous computational requirements. And there's so many statistics out there, right? But I've seen Bitcoin, for example, somebody saying that 1 or 2% of the global GDP is done for energy. I saw something the other day that the most recent or an average NFT might
Yeah.
be the amount of energy cost for one EU resident, right,
Yep.
for a month. I don't know. There's a lot of statistics out there, but the bottom line is that's a very significant energy cost and a electric consumption, carbon footprint. So that becomes a big question, for yes, blockchain has a lot of promise and it solves a lot of problems, but that's something that needs to be addressed, right? The scalability question and how sustainable is the particular protocol that you're going to work on, right? And so for us, that's why we've tried to tackle it that way. And then I think if you've got the right protocol, and then you take blockchain technology and you start to digitize assets,
Hmm.
later on some smart contracts to automate efficiencies while being able to still audit transactions on a blockchain, you start to provide sort of multi-layers of efficiencies that really will help to drive the sustainability equation. And so when you've got organizations that are concerned about sustainability, conservation, biodiversity, they have to look at, it behooves them to look at additional
Right.
technologies and solutions. It's using it in concert, right? So it's like IoT, blockchain, maybe geospatial, but you use all these things together to try to have as much transparency and efficiencies as possible, and that gives you an overall better footprint. I mean, there's lots of areas. Even when we're talking about carbon emissions, there's a whole universe there on carbon credits, and
Yep.
we've had lots of conversations about digitizing carbon credits, and there's some
Mhm.
projects out there doing that. But to provide transparency to these accounting processes and how these, for example, these tokens or these credits are handled and retired, these are all things that you can use technology to drive some efficiencies and transparency in the whole process.
I have one more question and then I'll end on a last question. The next one is a little bit what we touched on earlier is about sort of universities. and
Mhm.
maybe scientific research. When you talk to universities, do they kind of know what they want to do, or do they ask you, hey, if you were us, right? If you were us in this department, how would you use blockchain, right? Like, what are universities specifically, I guess, on the scientific research side, because I think
Mhm.
that's where it will have impact.
What it boils down to is where can they confidently get data sets.
Yep.
And so if we're going to do, for example, say blockchain-based research, typically the questions we'll get is there's already a good sense of problems and let's sort of like theories and hypotheses about what they want to tackle and to have innovative research. But then again, it's the quality of the data and
Hmm. Hmm.
who are the players in the ecosystem to provide that data. Right.
Right.
And so,
Right.
so if it's with us, for example, they may say, okay, we've got these ideas, but which of your customers
Right.
would be willing to share that
Correct.
data? Or if we don't have it, how do we reliably get that data? You need to have enough data to have a meaningful research. And by the way, we are actively involved in these kind of conversations, but I would say most of these leading universities have a pretty good idea on the problems that they want to tackle, and they have a pretty good understanding of what the technology brings. It's just a matter of understanding the players and then again getting to the data, high quality data that they can be able to have some good quantitative assessment of to support the conclusions, right? So I would say that's it, but we've had a tremendous amount of interest in terms of how to use technology with enterprises and then driving academic innovation and research.
Yeah.
That's to me, it's quite a natural fit,
Yep.
really globally. So we've certainly within our consortium, we're working with multiple universities right now, and we're looking forward to really onboarding more actually because there's just so much innovation happening, and we think blockchain can be a really great, compelling piece for that. So.
So the last question is a little bit about the future,
Mhm.
and the sector is it crosses a wide range of things. But what are you, maybe 3 to 5 years? Maybe what are you optimistic about, or what are the goals or successes you would like to see happen? Not only from a GoChain perspective, but just the industry.
Yeah. So if I take a step back and if I look at blockchain or really any emerging technology, right?
Yeah.
And you take that technology and then you think about adoption and impact.
Yep.
So much of that is predicated on timing. And what I think is exciting right now and in recent years is that there's been a lot of momentum for questions around transparency, right?
Yep.
Transparency, accountability. And COVID's been so difficult for so many, but I think if there is a silver lining is that there's a lot of questions about having more transparency on supply chains, and authenticity. And I think this is the kind of thing that's only going to continue. And I think that society is going to demand more transparency in a variety of different day-to-day, from the food they eat to just to the day-to-day living. Like you've got a lot of problems around the world that are being highlighted now, whether that be forced labor, whether
Hmm.
that mean depletion of stocks, whether that mean conservation and sustainability. All of these things I think are in a lens right now where everyone is very much focused. And of course, I think if you look, obviously there's the environment and climate, which is all from a society perspective, a high priority right now. Healthcare is a high priority right now. So I think there's a lot of issues right now that are so important where people are going to be receptive to utilizing the latest technologies to solve these problems. And we're seeing it right now. You're seeing the use of satellites harnessing all this data for AI and machine learning. And then how do we get good auditability of data, sharing of data? So you have blockchain technology, removing some of those friction points. It's almost like all harmonized coming together to tackle these major, major problems. And so for me, when I look forward, looking ahead, I see this as all really, really promising because we all want more transparency and I think accountability. I think it helps to not only level the playing field, but it helps to more people becomes more inclusive to help more people. And I think that's going to be a really positive impact from the use of all these different technologies to include blockchain.
Well, thanks so much, Henry. I learned a lot. So I do this selfishly, because sometimes I want to learn a lot more about a certain subject matter, and then listeners get to hopefully learn a little something like I did. So I appreciate you taking the time and explaining sort of complex, issues, and how we can, solve these complex issues with complex technology, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, that's kind of how we have to do it.
Yeah, no,
But
I
I
appreciate that,
appreciate you
Grant.
taking.
Yeah, and I wanted to also just say that appreciated it. Thanks so much, and this is such a good podcast, and I appreciate that you've been able to really spotlight all these great entrepreneurs out there